And now, for this week's State of Trade in Star Citizen. Last week saw impressive amounts of trading as the economy was pushed to its limits once again. No doubt caused by free rental options during the expo, commodity pricing and availability have seen historic highs and shortages, especially during last week's Drake Day. The IAE is wrapping up. The Intergalactic Aerospace Expo ends December 1st. With the finale of the expo soon to be underway, don't miss your chance to rent the C2 Hercules or Drake Caterpillar for free once again to take advantage of their impressive cargo capacity. There was an uptick in piracy last week as new freighters plied the trade lanes. Piracy is on the rise, and traders everywhere are cautioned to stay safe and alert. Consider your route and pay attention to who may be watching you come and go at major ports. Scrap entered its third week of being unavailable for trade. The lack of action from CIG after a quick back-end hotfix has left many traders frustrated with their lack of attention to the issue. CIG has yet to acknowledge that the issue exists. And now for market data. In the metals market, Agricium sees an expected surge. Agricium has a rarely seen base price of 22.50 and sells for 27.50. Around ArcCorp, Lyria's SAL2 rose to 23.82, up from last week's 23.07. In Crusader, Daymar deposits held near previous prices. Gudra ore rose to 24.09, up from last week's 23.96. ArcCorp 141 saw a small drop to 24.64, down from 24.75. In Microtech, SMCA8 on Calliope rose slightly to 24.86, up from a previous 24.62. Cleo's Cantwell rose to 23.86, up from last week's 23.55. Aluminum once again saw no notable movement, as the commodity holds little interest for traders. Aluminum has a base price of 1.11 and sells for 1.33 UEC. Prices held at base numbers across the board. Gold exploded last week as other commodities became more scarce. Gold has a base price of 5.41 and sells for 6.41. In ArcCorp, Humboldt Mines on Lyria saw a slight nudge to a price of 5.42. Around Crusader, Kudra ore on Daymar reached 5.68, up from a previous 5.63. Shubin SCD1 dipped to 5.69, slightly down from last week's 5.87. Around Hurston, the price of gold surged on Aberdeen. Norgard reached 5.70, with its sister location Anderson climbing to 5.86. Microtech saw similar pricing to Crusader, with Calliope's Caltag reaching 5.89, up from 5.84. SMO18 on the planet itself rose dramatically to 5.80, up from a previous 5.43. Titanium saw a massive surge as well, with the lowest price in the 7.80s range. Titanium has a base price of 7.10 and a sell price of 8.90. Stock was a consistent issue as well. Around ArcCorp, Lyria's SAL2 climbed to 7.99, up from a previous 7.63. SAL5 had a similar 7.96, up from last week's price of 7.56. Humboldt Mines held to 7.98, a near repeat of last week's 7.97. Around Crusader, Sellon's Tram and Myers held to 7.97 once again. In Hurston, Ariel's Bezdek and Lathan climbed to the high 7.80 range, with Bezdek having the week's low of 7.83. Around Microtech, Cleo's Cantwell repeated last week's price of 7.98. Tungsten saw even more traffic last week. Tungsten has a base price of 3.55 and sells for 4.06. In ArcCorp, Walla's ArcCorp 061 rose to a price of 3.58. ArcCorp 048 rose to 3.59. ArcCorp 056 climbed to 3.75, and ArtCorp 045 surged to 3.76. Around Crusader, Daymar's ArtCorp 141 rose slightly to 3.66. Shubin SCD1 on Daymar rose to 3.79, up from a previous 3.69. Around Hurston, Ariel's Bezdek saw an increase to 3.61, up from 3.56. Lathan had a similar increase to 3.57. Around Microtech, Caltag on Calliope held to 3.80, a near repeat of last week's 3.79. SMCA8 on Calliope rose to 3.72, up from last week's 3.69. Legal Vice sees Distilled Spirits with even higher prices and more shortages. Distilled Spirits has a base price of 4.06, with a sell price of 5.56 at major ports. In Crusader, Gillette Family Farms and Terra Mills on Cellin reached a record high of 4.71, with Bountiful Harvest on Daymar mirroring this pricing. This is up from last week's collective 4.66 pricing. Around Microtech, Bud's Growery on Euterpe had the overall lowest price of 4.62, up from last week's 4.57. Consider finding Shady Glen on Walla if you are insistent on freighting distilled spirits. Stims saw record movement as well last week. Stims has a base price of 2.80 and a sell price for 3.86 at major ports. In Crusader, Deacons on Yala surged to a record-breaking 3.24, up from 2.89. Picks on Cellin rose to 3 UEC, up from last week's 2.80. In Microtech, McGrath on Clio fell slightly to 3.04, up from a previous high of 3.07. Anvik on Calliope rose to 2.94, up from last week's 2.83. With its incredible pricing across the board, Stims may want to be avoided for the time being. Gases repeat typical surges. Astatine sees high prices and low stock yet again. Astatine has a base price of 7 and a sell price of 9 at major ports. Around ArtCorp, Walla's ArtCorp 061 had the lowest observed price of 7.67, a massive increase from a previous 7.04. ArtCorp 056 climbed sharply to 7.70, up from 7.32. On Lyria, leverage rose to 7.93, up from a previous 7.66. In Crusader, Yellow's ArtCorp 157 fell slightly to 7.91, slightly down from 7.95. Benson Mining on Yela rose slightly to 7.90, up from a previous 7.85. Around Hurston, Woodruff on Ida repeated last week's price of 7.88. Ryder climbed to 7.95, up from a previous 7.87. Both locations experienced regular supply shortages. Around Microtech, SMCA6 on Calliope rose to 7.95, up from last week's 7.83. On the planet itself, SMO10 fell to 7.79, down from 7.86. SMO22 rose to 7.88, up slightly from 7.86. Astatine continues to see supply shortages at all locations and should be avoided by bulk haulers for the time being. Chlorine sees some notable movement. Fluorine has a base price of 1.3 and a sell price of 1.71. Around Crusader, ArtCorp 157 on Yela repeats a price of 1.41. Benson Mining on Yela rose to 1.43, up slightly from 1.41. Around Microtech, Calliope's SMCA6 rose slightly to 1.43, up from 1.41. For sell locations, Deacons on Yela and Anvik on Calliope fell dramatically to the 1.58 range, far below a base sell price of 1.71. Fluorine saw typical surge movement. Fluorine has a base price of 2.35 and a sell price of 2.95. Last week saw Perlman on Magda rise to 2.40. However, the sell price continues to falter at most outposts. While most sell locations fell to the 2.70 range, Deacon's was the worst offender with a historic low of 2.67. With such low pricing at outposts, Fluorine may not be a good cargo to haul at this time. Hydrogen saw little movement last week. Hydrogen has a base price of 0.90 and a sell price of 1.12. ArcCorp 157 on Yela fell to 0.91, down from 0.96. SMCA 6 saw a slight bump to 0.92. Iodine sees no notable movement. Iodine has a base price of 0.35 and a sell price of 0.45. The commodity continues to hold little interest for traders. In the mineral market, Beryl continues to see traffic. Beryl has a base price of 4.06 and a sell price of 4.35. Around Crusader, ArcCorp 141 on Daymar held to last week's pricing of 4.12. Hudra ore on Daymar actually fell to base pricing, down from 4.14. Shubin SCD1 rose to 4.09. Around Microtech, Calliope's SMCA 8 fell slightly to 4.11, down from last week's pricing of 4.13. Corundum saw minor movement at 3 locations. Corundum has a base price of 2.30 and a sell price of 2.71. Around ArcCorp, Lyria's SAL2 rose slightly to 2.33. Humboldt Mines followed suit with identical pricing. In Crusader, Tram & Myers on Cellin saw the price of Corundum fall slightly to 2.37, down from last week's price of 2.39. Diamond sees repeat surging at all locations, with supply shortages across the system. Diamond has a base price of 5.85 and a sell price of 7.35. Around ArcCorp, Walla's 045 sees a high of 6.50, up from a previous 6.16. ArcCorp 056 followed at a similar 6.48, up from 6.14. ArcCorp 048 climbed to 6.49, up from 6.03. On Lyria, SAL5 rose to 6.32, up from its previous 6.08. At Crusader, Tram & Myers fell slightly to 6.51, down from last week's 6.52. Hurston's mini deposits continue to surge as well. On Magda, Han spiked to 6.53, up from a 6.25. Perlman reached 6.45, up from its previous price of base pricing. On the planet itself, Edmund was at 6.46, up from 6.41. Opperai rose to 6.54, up from 6.05. Pinewood bumped to 6.42, up slightly from last week's 6.41. Thetis rose to 6.56, up from its previous price of 6.33. Around Microtech, Deltana on the planet itself rose to 6.23, up slightly from 6.20. SMO13 rose to 6.33, up from a previous 6.18. Diamond continues to be in short supply at all locations. Laranite is Laranite. High pricing and short supply as always, as every trader attempts to grab the rare mineral. Laranite has a rarely seen base price of 25 and a sell price of 31.01. Around ArcCorp, ArcCorp 045 on Walla rose to 27.45, up from 27.05. ArcCorp 056 on Walla rose to 27.81, up from 27.49. In Crusader, Tram & Myers fell slightly to 27.63, up from its previous 27.67. Around Hurston, Bezdek on Ariel rose to 27.84, up from 27.73. Its sister location Lathan climbed to 27.82, up from a previous 27.59. Quartz sees minor movement for the first time. Quartz has a base price of 1.25 and a sell price of 1.55. Around ArcCorp, Walla's ArcCorp 045 saw a price of 1.33. On Lyria, SAL5 saw a minor nudge to 1.26. All other locations held to base pricing. Medical supplies follow Laranite once again in extreme pricing and minimal supply. Medical supplies have a rarely seen base price of 15.75 and a sale price of 19.25 at major ports. Around Crusader, Deacons on Yela reached 17.35, up from 17.32. On Selen, Hicks reached 17.34, up from 17.24. In Microtech, Anvik on Calliope fell slightly to 17.13, down from 17.39. On Clio, McGrath fell to 17.28, down from 17.37. Processed food sees no notable movement. Processed food has a base price of 1.21 and a sell price of 1.56. Scrap is still unavailable for trade. Scrap has a base price of 1.35 and a sell price of 1.85. Until CIG rolls back their previous hotfix, scrap cannot be sold at any location in-game. Do not purchase scrap until further notice. Agricultural supplies saw minor movement. Agricultural supplies have a base price of 1 with a sell price of 1.20. Around Crusader, Deacons on Yela rose to 1.05. On Selen, Hicks sees a small nudge to 1.01. And now for next week's forecast. With the IAE coming to a close on December 1st, expect pricing to relax slightly. Gold will continue to see heavy freighting around Hurston. Titanium and Astatine will most likely stay near a price of 7.90 at most locations. Fluorine and Chlorine will experience more pricing issues at sell locations until scrap is fixed. And now for this week's trading tip. This tip can actually help all pilots. Are you having issues accessing your MFDs? Are you accidentally interacting with your cockpit instead of screens? Follow this workaround. While in the pilot seat, hold your interact button. Then click your middle mouse button. Then use any of the WASD keys to move between your MFDs. This will keep you from accidentally interacting with the cockpit while attempting to make changes to your MFDs. That's it for this week's State of Trade. Until next time, keep on trucking.